change it up here. Now, one of the things with roughness is a tip about this is, you can't mess up the roughness really. I mean, there isn't a right or wrong. There isn't a that's not rough or that's, there isn't a right or wrong in this. This is very, very much an artistic approach to this piece. And so, if you need to tweak it like that, you can. But it's really cool. So if I start to kind of just look around, you can see, if we just kind of zoom in where that highlight is, as I start to kind of orbit this little globe here around, you can see how that the scratches are affecting those highlights and stuff like that. So that's in my that's actually happening in my roughness channel. Now, if we come over here to our modes again, we have the ability to look at solo mode. The best way to handle that is just to hit C on the keyboard. So here's our channels again, and this is all going to come together here in just a moment. So here we've got basically our diffuse. Here's our height, which we have nothing on. Here's our roughness. So here's that roughness map that we've been working with. And then also here is our metallic, so pure white. So that is how PBR works inside of Substance Painter. You can actually just work with it by default. That's the only mode that we have. You can set which channels you want to work, so you can use roughness metallic or spec gloss if you want. And then also you can go through and configure Substance Painter to work with whatever channels, however you want to paint, and all those kind of things. So let's go back over here to our slide. And now let's start to talk about the texturing guidelines. So this is where I'm going to kind of really start to kind of bring all this stuff together and what we're talking about. So we kind of have an idea of, what PBR is, or why it's important, how it kind of works inside of our Substance tools. But now you really need to understand the important part is some of these guidelines, like about authoring the content. And so the first thing that I do is I start with asking myself, is what I'm texturing, is it a metal or not? So yes or no. I need to know if it's metal or not. And then metals are conductors, and they conduct electricity. And then non-metals are dielectrics, which mean they do not conduct electricity. And so metals have no diffuse color, only reflection. So the diffuse color is black for metals, and metals will actually reflect a colored value. So that's why we have no diffuse color, but only color for the reflections. So let's talk about our base color here, our diffuse albedo. So I kind of put it like this because it's one of those things where, like, in Substance Designer and Substance Painter, we call it diffuse. Some people call it base color. Some people say albedo. It's all the same thing, but diffuse can sometimes, if you're thinking about a diffuse texture from kind of like the older way of doing things, meaning like non-PBR workflows, diffuse can have a different meaning. So you just kind of have to, think about, just know what it is you're working with. And so when we say diffuse or base color or albedo, what we're really talking about is an image with no lighting information. So no ambient occlusion, no baked information, nothing. And so, and the colors need to stay within a specific brightness range. And a really good rule is that you do not go under, now if we're looking at a scale from 0 to 255 in RGB, you keep that around 30 to 50 value. So, if you look at that, like 50 to 255, you do not go under these values. So the darkest type of objects you can think about is like charcoal, and then like the brightest objects we can think about would be like, fresh white snow. And so, a lot of things may appear to look very dark when we look at it with our eyes, but honestly, when they've been, scientifically measured, it's really surprising on how bright things really are. And so if you just stick with these rules here, that you do not go under that 30 to 50 and that 255 range, and that, again, so don't go over 240. So if you look at something, can't be too bright, so don't ever go over 240 out of that 0 to 255 range. If you stick with that, you'll be really good. So an example to that is this texture here. So when I was working on the crossbow, I just went online, found a cool wood texture, and downloaded it, and this is what I started with. And so I'm looking at this texture, and I'm like, okay, well, this looks really cool, but the problem is that you can see all this intricate kind of detail in the wood. And so this is where we need to kind of think about things a little differently, because, before PBR, I would look at that and go, oh, that's great. I want to use all that detail and stuff. But we need to basically extrapolate that kind of information from the albedo or diffuse or base color, that texture. We need to extrapolate that, because the way the shader and the rendering works, it needs to not have that in there. And that ambient inclusion, that kind of like detail needs to be put somewhere else, like as in its own ambient occlusion slot, its own cavity map slot. So it needs to be, extrapolated from that diffuse texture. So here we have this, And then what I did in Substance Designer is I removed some of those dark values, again, adhering to this range right here, and this is what I got. So I basically brought these levels up, and I'm going to show you how I did that in Substance Designer. So the biggest thing about base color, remove all the lighting, no ambient occlusion. Okay, so the next thing is metal. So how does metal work? And this kind of took me a bit to understand. And actually, once I got it, it's like really simple. Is maybe I'm just dense in my head, but yeah, after I got a handle on it, I was like, oh wow, this is actually so much easier to do than juggling specular and glossiness. So anyways, like I said before, the diffuse base color is the reflection color. Okay, and so we have this metal map here. Now over here we're looking at a gloss map, but this is our metal map. So the metal map is either black or white. It's either metal or not. It's very binary. It's very contrast. It's either on or off, white or black. And so again, white equals metal, black equals not metal. And so a metal map should look like this. Again, very contrasty. And the metal colors, so what gives that where do you get that reflectance value? So before you would think about, well, our specular maps, and that's kind of telling something, the specular amount. Well, when you're using this metalness workflow, that reflectance amount is actually going to be derived from the diffuse color. And so those are picked from real world values. And again, that'll make more sense when I show you the next slide. But basically, we have this kind of black and white. I want you to kind of think in those terms. Now, one other thing about this is it is okay to have some transitional grayscale values in this metal map. Not a lot. You don't want your metal map to look like this. This would be a very incorrect metal map. You want to be, again, it's very on or off. Something's either metal or it's not. Now, when you could do that, and it's very, very hard to see and hear, and if I go back to Substance Designer, maybe we can see it. Let me just open up the crossbow again. And let me just zoom in here on my metal map. Let's see, fit that to view. Yeah, you can barely see it. Okay, well, it's there, believe me, I'm sorry. But basically what I'm saying here is that if we go back over to that slide, so like what I did there is I actually added some dirt onto the crossbow. Here, you can see it here in the 2D view. So there's some dirt onto this. And so we have metal, and then we have some dirt on top of that metal. Well, when the light's hitting the surface, it's actually, it might just be hitting mostly the dirt. And so, the dirt, it's not metal, so it's on top of the metal. So we can put some of that into the metal map because those areas are not actually metal, they're dirt. And so that's precisely what I did. So the way that works is here inside of Substance Designer, when we start to add our material color blend nodes. So I have this dirt. Let's see, it's right here. So here's the dirt. And so this little filter here is just adding dirt for me. Well, once I plug this into my full material, so here it is. And once I plug this into my full material here, my material color blend, I can then come over here to my metal, and I can actually, and well, if you look at that, you can see that I didn't actually have that changed. So there we go. That's why we don't see it. I could actually come in and I could say, well, right now it's saying metal, full metal. I could actually pull this down a little bit so the dirt's affecting that metal channel just a little bit. Okay, so just enough. So it gives that kind of that effect of you have that metal surface and there's a little bit of dirt on top of that surface that's kind of helping to, because it's not actually metal. We're talking about some dirt on top of the metal at that point. Now, another thing that you can think about is things like painted metal. That one kind of threw me for a loop because I was like, well, the painted metal is not really metal either because it's the painted, the paint on top of the metal is not metal. So I guess you get super technical and be like, well, there could be some metal in, but I mean, there's not any metal in that paint. So, you can, at that point, we're talking about maybe, you're talking about authoring it differently at that point. But the metal map, let me go back to that, our slides here. That metal map needs to only tell what is metal. Now, like I said, some of that dirt laying on top, it's not blocking the metal completely. It's kind of soft, transparent, just a little bit, and so it is going to break up what I'm denoting as metal because the dirt is on top of the metal, so it's not metal. And so anyways, that's something to think about. And like I said, this here is our roughness map. Your metal map should never look like this. It should be really, really contrasting. Okay, so like I said before, we're still talking about metal here, and this will help. This slide here, they're thinking like this really helped me completely understand this. So again, we start, is the surface metal? Yes or no? let's talk about the surface being metal. So yes, white, the surface is metal. So again, we know that we put white in the map. Now, that base color, so we basically are putting this in the diffuse map. So the base color of that metal is always black. It's not sampled from the map. It's not something, it's just there. You don't have to worry about it. So there is no real base color to the metal. There's only the reflectance. And so the reflectance, and we're talking about this F0, is sampled from the diffuse map, and that determines the value. So here you can see I have my metal map. We have the metal areas denoted here by our map. And then what happens is the shader will go through and it'll say, okay, these areas on this map are saying they're metal. So how do I know how reflective they are? Well, I better go over here and look at the diffuse map. Inside the diffuse map, I'm going to get that reflectance value from that. And so that's how that works. And then we use real-world measured values to determine what that color is. And so that's how you set that up. So if we go back again, we talked about that F0. We're talking about basically on that Fresnel graph or that Fresnel equation. We're talking about if we're staring right at this surface, we're perpendicular, looking right at it. What is the reflective value right here? And that's our F0. And so that's what we're talking about when we go to here, our reflectance F0. And so again, if it's metal, the base color is black. Again, that's just a note. There's not something you actually do at all. It's all just don't even worry about this. We just know that we put the reflectance value in the diffuse map. Now, if the surface is not metal, so no, it's not. It's black. So again, our wood, it's all black over here. It's wood. So what we do is we say our base color albedo, it's basically the color of the wood is going to be sampled from the diffuse map. So it goes and gets the color of the wood based off this map. And again, that note value should stay within 30 to 240. Now our reflectance, how reflectance is this? What is the reflective F0 value of this? Now, this is something that's going to be hard-coded. So 4% or 0.04 plastic. Okay, this is going to be like the default hard-coded value, and it's not set in the map. So we don't set, if we're going in and we're saying that something's like plastic or something that's not a metal, we're not setting this reflectance value. And the value, again, is based on real-world measurement, and there's no values under 0.02. Now, where am I getting this information? I'll tell you. There is a really good blog, and this guy, his name is Sebastian Lagarde. This guy is really, really, really good and knows all of his stuff really super well. And I love this blog, and I've learned a ton by looking at this here. And so a couple things that I want to point out is that when it came to sampling those metal values, so right off the bat, he's got one of his recent posts here is he's released this chart here, which is physics-based rendering chart for Unreal 4. Now, Unreal Engine is using the same PBR workflow that Substance is using, which is really nice if you're using Unreal. So it's a real one-to-one match there. And so since Unreal is based off the Disney BDRF model as well. And so he has this chart. You can download this chart as a uncompressed high-res file. So when you actually go to sample these values, this is one place you can get them. I mean, you can get them from other places as well, but this is just one place where I got them from. And so here you can see that I have things like gold, silver, aluminum, all this kind of stuff. So what I did was I brought this uncompressed image into